Make absolutely no doubt about it. After forcing public schools to adopt the one-size-fits-all Common Core social justice nonsense education, the very same educrats who destroyed public schools are now waging war against homeschoolers. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with the progressive war on homeschooling as more and more leftists fear that such educated children will be much harder to control as adults, and they are exactly right about this. Now, I've been talking about this on the Common Core Trail for over 10 years now, and I remember the very first Common Core lecture I gave up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, to a group of Catholic moms and dads about 10 years ago. God, time flies. I remember telling these parents the very first time that I had this conversation that if you homeschool your kids or you have your kids in private schools, this is something you have to pay attention to, because once they coordinate the public schools, once they reduce the public schools to one-size-fits-all, centrally controlled, common education, once they did that and had 60 million American school kids locked in, they were coming for you. And now they're coming for you.
It's exactly what's happening. There was actually an article, the original article that was published was called The Risks of Homeschooling by Aaron O'Donnell, and it was published in Harvard Magazine. Well, this article actually cited a so-called PhD Harvard law professor named Elizabeth Bartholet, and her insanity, essentially, in the article has caused outrage by a lot of different people. So various outlets have basically published what it is that she's been talking about, Daily Wire being one of them. And so Elizabeth Bartholet, she's a Harvard law professor and the director of the Harvard Law School's Child Advocacy Program. And she published this paper basically decrying exactly the dangers of homeschooling and what it means. And you can't believe some of the things that came out of her pen.
And it's not just a paper. There's a conference being held. If you're a regular watcher of the Dr. Duke Show, and if you're not, no soup for you. Get on the gravy train here. Watch every day. But if you're a regular watcher of the Dr. Duke Show, you will know that this is part of a conference, too. This is Harvard Law School that in June is hosting a big conference, June of this year, about about why Common Core should be applied to homeschoolers, why homeschoolers should be brought under the heel of public schools. Mm-hmm. And as Bartholet, or it's either Bartholet or Bartholet, I don't know. Either way, she's arguing that homeschool should not exist because it is authoritarian. Mm-hmm. And so the argument here, we did a couple shows on this last week about that conference at Harvard, if you want to go back and look. So this Elizabeth Bartholet, she attacks homeschooling from two perspectives, right? The public schools and educrats, technocrats, progressives all across this country don't believe you have a right to educate your own kids. They do not think that you, just because you gave birth to them, just because you're paying for them, raising them, giving them a home, you should not have a right to pass your values and your worldview onto them. You are in the way. And so what they've done is they've created this idea that every children, I'm quoting from her own article right now, that homeschooling not only violates children's right to a quote-unquote meaningful education, translation, a non-academic education. Homeschooling, she says, not only violates a children's right to a meaningful education and their right to be protected from potential child abuse, but may keep them from contributing positively to a democratic society. And I love that. She says potential child abuse. So in other words, even though statistics show recently that about 10% of public school kids, that's a lot of kids. If you got 60 million school kids, do the math. About 10% of public school kids argue they have been abused or molested in the public schools.
In the public schools.
And we say nothing about that, right? But the potential is if a kid stays home, mom or dad might molest them. They have to be protected from that. And where are we going to protect them? In the public schools, where a lot more kids, according to the statistics, are actually molested.
And then on top of it, in that same piece, it was not just that they're homeschooling, it's that, oh my gosh, Christianity.
That's number two, right?
Might be mentioned. But surveys of homeschoolers show that a majority of such families, by some estimates, up to 90%, are driven by conservative Christian beliefs and seek to remove their children from mainstream culture. And then Bartholet notes that some of these parents are extreme religious ideologues who question science and promote female subservience and, oh, wait for it, white supremacy.
So again, Christian is always conservative to these people, right?
And bad.
And here's the thing. Of course. But why wouldn't you want to remove kids from mainstream culture with all of the LGBTQ garbage being thrown at them, all of the gender confusion being thrown at them, all of the hijacking of their public school education with ideology and radical left-wing politics? But that's other. So, of course, Christian kids, by definition, want to be removed from public mainstream ideas. Bartholet also notes that some of these parents are extreme religious ideologues, right? Some of them, right? How many public school teachers are extreme political ideologues? How many superintendents? How many state board of education people in this country are extreme ideological progressive atheists? Most of them.
And then she even says the U.S. Constitution, with its negative rights structure, is an anomaly, outdated and inadequate by the standards of the rest of the world. The U.S. Constitution's focus on negative rights represents an older Western constitutional tradition, increasingly out of step with emerging constitutional norms in the rest of the world. It's always in the rest of the world because she just wants us to be globalists.
So the Constitution, Christianity, and individuality are at war with public school teachers, public school educrats. Let's give Mike Pompeo the last word.
On Sunday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, actually, who got his JD from Harvard Law School, by the way, blasted the article in Critics of Homeschooling. He tweeted, "The risk to children is not from homeschooling. The risk is from radical leftist scholars seeking to impose their values on our children."
Amen, if it's not too white supremacist.
All right, moving on. We're going to New York, and basically other parts of the nation where they are implementing a no-harm grading policy. But the big question for all of New York is really always, as it is, New York City. Are they going to follow suit? So the rest of New York is doing this, but will New York City have a no-harm grading policy? According to Chalkbeat, Chicago has already instituted a no-harm policy where students' grades can only improve during remote learning, in line with state guidance, of course. And in Denver, high school students can opt in to receive letter grades but can't receive an F, or they can choose to take a class for credit or no credit. And the best one is in San Francisco, where they have proposed a simple answer: give every student an A. But because it's New York City, they're wondering, are they going to also do this no-harm grading policy?
And the answer is yes, because you have no choice. If the rest of the state is doing it, New York can't not do it, and I'll tell you why. If you've been paying attention to the news, this may seem like a non-segue point, but it is. Hillary Clinton came out today and said, we can't let the COVID virus pass without using it as a way to get universal health care. That the purpose of COVID, what she says, whatever else it is to force single-payer health care. This is what they're doing to your kids' grades. What I mean by that is that this is not about making your kids learn. Obviously, kids who don't show up, if you're a kid who doesn't show up on the online class, and we had a story last week, almost 50% of American school kids, 50% of American school kids are not showing up regularly for the lessons. And yet this policy says you can't give them an F, and their grades can only go up. That has nothing to do with teaching your kids or your kids learning. That your schools don't care about that anymore. This is about taking advantage of an idea. And the idea is you get paid by your state. In most states, each school gets money based on how many kids pass. How many kids are promoted to the next grade. If you fail all the kids who deserve to fail, less money, less funding. So here's a flawless system where you just promote everybody for any reason, not because they know anything, not because of the virus, but you use this as a way of implementing. And I'll tell you this too. Once COVID is gone, these ideas are not going to go away. Within 10 years, if nothing changes, your public schools will have moved to a no-harm grading system for every student.
It's because every student has to fail equally, essentially. So New York City has not given this citywide policy, but the teachers are struggling with basically setting expectations without penalizing their students who are having the trouble accessing any kind of remote learning. So from the article of Chalkbeat, they said that some students may have trouble getting online, while others face trauma associated with the pandemic or the added responsibility of caring for siblings. Pointing to those issues, the city's education department has urged schools to be flexible with their grading policies.
But you see, every one of those things you can have when there's no virus.
Yes.
Right? Kids have stress because they have bad home lives. Kids may have trouble connecting or understanding what the teachers are saying. Every one of those reasons why we have to do this for COVID will exist once you get done with this. And speaking of this, and so my point was, New York City will have to. Because if New York City starts failing kids or holding kids accountable, they're going to get less money from the state. And you know that the Bill de Blasios of the world, the fake socialists, want as much green as they can get from the state and federal government. And so on top of all of that, we have a situation where New York, we're 3 months into this? We're 2 months into the sequester from schools, and New York still hasn't gotten kids the technology they need.
That's the thing. New York City actually started their remote learning 5 weeks ago. So 5 weeks ago, and there are 19,000 students who still don't have devices that they had requested to get. So department officials and educators have been mobilizing to fill the technology gap, mailing hard copies of assignments home, dropping off 175,000 devices that the schools already had owned, and they're distributing 231,000 of the 300,000 newly purchased iPads since this whole thing began, and yet still, 5 weeks, kids still can't access remote learning.
They have nothing to say about this. I mean, and and we go back to the statistic from last week, about 50% of those kids are not attending school anyway. And you can pretend all you want that this is about compassion, it's about trauma, right? Don't we hear, think back to the halcyon days before Corona. We kept hearing how our kids are traumatized. They're traumatized by all the schoolwork, and they're traumatized by Donald Trump, and they're traumatized by global warming, and they're traumatized by not being able to immediately get transgender surgery when they're in their 3rd grade. They're traumatized. That's the reason we're doing these things. It has nothing to do with education.
And as we talk always about, well, education, they need more money, and guess what? They need more money. 300,000 devices cost just over $269 million, and it includes 3 months of unlimited internet access. So the department actually received $42 million in discounts.
Of course they
for
did.
that. And so they got the devices, the cases, the internet plans, and they may be eligible for federal funding to help cover the cost.
Dr. Duke prediction. These kids receiving the computers are going to spend more time gaming and looking at porn than actually doing their schoolwork. Dr. Duke prediction that's already going to come true. Don't doubt me on this.
And just so parents know how to break that down, that's $897 per device.
That's
porn.
a lot of free.
That's a lot of porn.
That's a lot of free Pornhub.
Pornhub, that's
right?
Exactly
it's
what
a lot of free Pornhub.
On to our next story. We're going to go across the pond to the UK because we have an op-ed that was written in the Huffington Post, which is just awful to begin with. And it's Emily Cousins, a PhD student. Of course, she's studying gender studies, and she teaches a women's studies course at Oxford. And she's bemoaning that she does not want Oxford, who's currently working to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, she does not want them to do this because it may make Britons more patriotic.
Yeah, this is a clear window into the mind of your university professors. And keep in mind that it's your university professors who teach public school teachers how to think, how to teach, right? So whatever goes on in the minds of university professors, that gets filtered down into the public schools as well. So this isn't just a college story, but this gives you a perfect window into the mind of a university academic. Boy, we really want to cure COVID, but we don't want a Western country to do it. We don't want England or America or Australia. We don't want any of these evil colonialists. Let's just point out to what this is. We don't want white males to take credit for this. We don't want white males and white male culture. We'd almost rather suffer and die and wait for a third world person to develop a vaccine so they could be. Now, again, and if this was just developed in India or Africa or China and the Chinese were being all patriotic, this idiot would talk about how wonderful it is that the Chinese love their culture. But should it happen in England, and heaven forbid, by a white male, and English people started to say, hey, blokes, we did it, mate. We did it, mate. Let's all go down to the pub and toss one back. Yep. That would be the end of that would be reified. That would be promoting xenophobia.
Oh, of course.
This is how they literally think.
Well, Cousins says that a successful vaccine will make folks overlook the UK's devastating delay in reacting to the pandemic. Yes, because if we actually have the cure, oh, darn, we're going to overlook, it took an extra day or two for them to shut down the country.
It's even worse than that. What Cousins says is that if we make this vaccine in the UK, we will overlook the devastating delay in reacting, such as Prime Minister Boris Johnson's concerns over things like individual liberty. See, Boris Johnson is a monster because he was afraid of taking away people's civil rights in the name of COVID, and she's mad at him that he didn't take it away. And what do you think this academic would have said if right before it even got bad, Boris Johnson, white male, took away British civil rights? Guarantee you she would have called him a fascist for doing it. This is how the left thinks, my friends. Understand. And you went through education programs at a big university. Is this not the mindset of your teachers and the curriculum?
This is precisely the mindset.
When we teach teachers how to teach, we fill them with this kind of hypocritical and nonsensical rage and animosity.
And that's why she says, we'll forget the lessons that the pandemic has taught us so far, because our education colleges, they teach us how to teach. We will forget these lessons that the UK and the US are in fact not exceptions at the global stage, that we are not only vulnerable but can also afford to learn lessons from countries regardless of whether we have a special relationship with them, such as South Korea, that being white, male, and Oxford educated may not be the only criteria for effective leadership.
And her entire statement there is bull, right? We do pay attention to other cultures, right?
How dare you say bull?
Now, here's another thing. Why wouldn't she say to the Chinese government, who refuses to learn the lesson, who refuses to be transparent, who is authoritarian to the point of taking away civil rights, and who clearly wasn't prepared for what happened to them? Notice that no criticism goes their way. We're supposed to learn from cultures like that. They're better than we are, and the only reason, they're not white males.
Oh.
That's the only reason these people have.
And so what's happening, and again, why Cousins keeps bemoaning is the fact that at Oxford, they're getting close to having some sort of a vaccine. And she says, oh my gosh, that is going to make them increasingly patriotic to the country. And they're actually going to care what happens right there in England and in the UK, or just the UK overall. We can't have that. We cannot have that.
Harold Bloom, late professor at Yale, actually coined a term for people like this. He called them the school of resentment, because they don't have anything to offer these progressives, these multiculturalists. All they do is lament how great traditional white culture has been. The school of resentment.
It's time for some real education. Today, we all know William Shakespeare. We've heard of him. But someone who's just a little bit younger than him is actually John Webster, who was also a playwright working in London in the early 17th century. And one of his greatest works, in the greatest of the Jacobean period, is the tragicomedy The Duchess of Malfi.
Yeah, and if you think about the Elizabethan and Jacobean period of English literature, from about 1585 through about 1640, when the Puritans could shut down the stage, that is the greatest period of drama in the world. I mean, and not just because it's got Shakespeare in it. If you were to take William Shakespeare, who is definitively the greatest playwright ever, you take Shakespeare out of the mix, the playwrights of this period still have produced plays. Sadly, most people haven't read them. People like Christopher Marlowe and John Webster and Ben Jonson. These great playwrights, we don't read them enough because Shakespeare so dominates the period. One of my favorite plays, I always try to teach it alongside Shakespeare's Othello, is John Webster's The Duchess of Malfi. It was published in 1613. And it is a eerie, dark tragedy. Webster is known for his haunting imagery, his creepy language. His plays, when you read his plays, even as modern people, they're the stuff of horror movies. It really is. He had a very dark imagination, Webster. He was very into the macabre. And so if you know anything about Elizabethan drama, think about the graveyard scene in Hamlet. There's a lot of macabre in Shakespeare. There's a lot of macabre in this period. It's because there were so many plagues. Think about how bad the bubonic plague was. It kept popping up during Shakespeare's career. But even more than the plague, simple flu. Sound familiar, people? A simple strain of the flu killed more people in Elizabethan England than the plague did. And so the theaters were constantly being shut down. Death was everywhere. And so these plays became darker and darker and darker. And Webster's Duchess of Malfi is about an interesting female character. As a very rare that you have a female as the lead character. She is the tragic hero. She oversteps herself. She, like typical tragic heroes, she has power and she abuses it, but then she pays a terrible price for it. So much so that her two royal brothers punish her to the point of driving her to madness and death. And there's a great scene where she's being tormented. She's being hounded. At one point, they put her in a madhouse and force her to live along the criminally insane. And it just drives her. And here is one of the two brothers' henchmen who is trying to get her to kill herself, right? And the lines go like this. What is this flesh? He's trying to get her, remember, to kill herself. What is this flesh of ours, he says. A little crudted milk, fantastical puff paste. Our bodies are weaker than those paper prisons used to keep flies in, more contemptible since ours is to preserve earthworms. Didst thou ever see a lark in a cage, such as the soul in the body? This world is like her little turf of grass, and the heaven o'er our heads like her looking glass, only gives us a miserable knowledge of the small compass of our prison. What an image, right? He's trying to get her to despise this world. Throw that back up there, Mike. He says, what is this flesh that we care so much for? It's a little bit of curdled milk. Think about dropping acid into a cup of milk and it immediately chunks up. That's what the human flesh is. What did God make a man out of? Dirt, clay, right? If you go back to the poem, right? What is this flesh that we care so much about? It's a little bit of crudted milk. It is fantastical puff paste. Our bodies are weaker than those little paper prisons boys used to keep flies in, and more contemptible. Since the paper prison holds a fly, what is our body fit for? Earthworms when they put us in the grave. Did you ever see a lark in a cage? That is the soul in the body. What a beautiful image, right? A beautiful lark that should be free to stretch its wings and sing and soar. It's been imprisoned in this little cage. That is what the soul is in this frail, contemptible body of ours, right? You think we live in a world where the body is everything. If you're not trim, if you're not beautiful, if you're not perfect, you're nobody in Hollywood, right? That we have this fetish for the body here. And as Christians, we should recognize how lame and transient a thing is the body compared to the soul. We have lost that message. And that's what makes us all materialists. Did you ever see a lark in a cage? Such is the soul in the body. This world is like her little turf of grass, and the heaven over our head is the mirror that shows us how miserable our physical existence is. Throw that last picture up, Mike. And if you ever saw the movie Shakespeare in Love, that was about 10 years ago, that little boy in the movie who's feeding rats to cats, that was John Webster.
Well, that's going to be our Thursday. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Now, we are going to wrap it up with our fun fact of the day. Since we talked about the UK today, did you know the unicorn is the national animal in Scotland? I thought it was a joke, but no, it's just Celtic mythology and all of that.
For people who eat a lot of haggis, I'm not surprised that the only animal they could come up with is a mythological one. You keep rocking it, you Scots. We love you. And that's going to do it for us today. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. And until next time, which is to say tomorrow, stay educated, my friends. Nay worries. Nay worries.